Hello and welcome into a special edition of Beyond the Darkness. Now, I'm Tim Dennison for Dave Schrader today, and you may be asking why the special edition today, Tim. Well, a good friend of our show has passed away, and we felt we definitely needed to pay tribute to Brad Steiger. Brad was a gem in the paranormal world. He was definitely one of those men that you kind of need to stop the press for. And you need to pay tribute, pay homage to. Brad was one of a kind. You know, he made more than a couple of handfuls of appearances on Darkness Radio and Beyond the Darkness throughout the years. And we're going to play his last appearance on our show. And he had some profound things to say when we talked about his last book that he and his wife Sherry had put out. And I look forward to when Brad came on the show, because Brad was not only an awesome author, but he was a great orator. He was a great storyteller. And Brad was one of those guys who, when he started to talk, he grabbed your attention. There was something about the timbre of his voice, his pitch, and the way he delivered a story that grabbed your attention. And he could talk about anything and simply just grab you and bring you in and hold your attention. And in that, he was a lot like Art Bell, who we lost on Friday the 13th in April of this year. And he actually co-authored a book with Art. And in that, that's kind of sad that these forefathers of the paranormal are passing away as we're getting into the later years of this decade. And it seems like we're doing more and more of these shows, and it's becoming sadder and sadder as we trudge through the end of this decade. But Brad Steiger passed away at the age of 82 on Sunday, and he is survived by his wife, children, and grandchildren. And we felt that this would be a fitting tribute to play this last show with Brad. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background on Brad, if you're not familiar, and if you're not, you're just not doing the paranormal right. You're probably sitting in front of the television too much. Brad grew up in Fort Dodge, Iowa. He was an Iowa kid. He began in Fort Dodge, Iowa on February 19th, 1936. And he was a typical Iowa farm boy until around August of 1947. He had a severe farm equipment accident, which actually gave him a near-death experience that altered the directions of his religion, his career ambitions, and his life in general. And while he recovered physically, everything else seemed to have changed for Brad. And he actually had an interview with the Des Moines Register. And Brad, at that time, remembered that among his earliest memories, he had the memory of a man and a woman who would walk into his bedroom at night and stand at his bedside and look down at him. Now, Brad did believe that that man and woman that would stand by his bedside were the couple that he believed in the end were his great-grandparents and had lived in that house. And that kind of sparked his belief in the paranormal and kind of set him on his journey. Brad then left the farm after college to teach English at a high school, and then journalism and creative writing at Luther College there in Iowa. And fortunately for us, here in the paranormal world and the world in general, he wrote in his spare time and published a biography of silent movie star Rudolph Valentino, and his interest in the paranormal drew him into the field from there and led to his first book contracts. And the first one was Ghost, Ghouls, and Other Peculiar People. Ghost, Ghouls, and Other Peculiar People. That was published in 1965. And when he quit teaching to write full-time, a woman gave him his pen name, which we've come to know him as, Brad Steiger, and which she said meant to one who guides others to higher awareness. And that's what Brad has done through his entire career. He has guided us to higher awareness in every single book that he has released, every single book that he's brought to us, every story, every bit of knowledge that he's passed on to us. He's enlightened us. And even when he's come on the radio with us, every program that he's presented us with knowledge that has given us a higher awareness. So without further ado, let's present you one last time. Our friend Brad Steiger passed away at the age of 82 this past Sunday. Here he is one last time on Beyond the Darkness.
There is a place that is spoken about only in whispers. A dark area that spawns the beginnings of urban legends. A place where anything can happen and usually does. During the light of day, it hides just outside of view. But when the sun goes down, spirits, creatures of the night, roam free, and things do go bump in the night. It is in every state and every country, and there is no escaping it, no matter how safe you feel behind your locked doors and latched windows. So we invite you to turn down the lights and turn up your radio while we join Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis, your hosts, on a journey into the darkness on the edge of town.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. I'm your host, Dave. That guy over there, well, that's Tim. And we've got a great show lined up for you. That's a promise. Brad Steiger will be joining us. Real visitors, voices from beyond and parallel dimensions for the first few hours of the show. Then later on in the show, in hour 3, author Frank Joseph joins us. Our dolphin ancestors, keepers of lost knowledge and healing wisdom. That's what you can expect on tonight's show. Let's get into tonight's show. Real visitors, voices from beyond and parallel dimensions. Our guest this evening, as I mentioned, one of our favorites, Brad Steiger. He is the author and co-author, Tim, of 181 books and over 17 million copies in print. He's back with us this evening to talk about the new book that he and his wife have written. Sherry was going to join us. I guess she's not feeling very well, so our thoughts and prayers are going out to her. Brad, thank you for joining us this evening and spending your time here.
Oh, my pleasure. And may I first add our prayers and our amen to that beautiful soliloquy you gave to the people going through the terrible floods. We, too, are in our mail getting just an overwhelming sense of malaise that seems to be, touching people right now. People are very confused. They're feeling alone. And I would just, if I may, like to add my hallelujah to what you just said.
Well, I appreciate that. The horrible weather taking place in Texas, this devastation. You've written on so many topics, Brad, so many different aspects of what we consider the paranormal, the supernatural, and the strange. Do you find that there are just these periods where almost like a cloud of darkness just envelops people in mass amounts, and it just, as quickly as it comes, it dissipates? Is that a cyclical thing, or is it all psychological, do you think?
No, it's, in my opinion, it's cyclical. These are things that do affect us. And as you said, we have to have the spiritual strength and the courage to recognize that, you can use all the cliches you want. The sun will shine again. It'll be a bright day tomorrow. But it's true. But sometimes, easier said than done, right?
Exactly.
I mean, when you're really going through it, man. We all have those times in life. And we just have to recognize that, we stay strong. This is a time for however you deal with the cosmos spiritually, that you rely upon that eternally powerful source of strength that many people give many different names. You have your own name for that wonderful energy, and that's when you intensify your personal relationship with that power.
In a time now where I think people have pulled away from formalized religion probably more than any other time in our history.
True.
And they're seeking answers outside, it still seems like when people do pull together, there are incredible acts of energy, like you said, whatever you want to call that, the God essence, the universal flow, whatever. When people come together with a a purpose and an intent, they can literally move mountains. We've seen it. It's so amazing. Why do you think that it still seems so fringe to the rest of the world and science that they don't take more of a hard-edged look at that type of thing?
Well, this is something that I see as cyclical too. I'm a child of the Depression, and the time then where people were really pulling together, followed by this terrible World War II. But just using that as an example, everyone gave their spirit, heart, and soul to the war effort. We kids brought our dimes, once a week to buy our little war stamps. And every movie theater, between features would pass the little, in our little town, it happened to be, an ice cream container, the old kind you packed by hand, and you would put in, your quarter, your dime, or whatever. Everyone was involved in that, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. We have, and we've been hearing this lately a great deal, but we've been hearing it in so many diverse ways. We have a diversity now. We have almost an animosity for each other. And this is what we have to recognize again. We are all one. We all breathe the same air. We all have the same blood. We all have the same brain mechanism. We truly are one. And that's one of the themes of our new book. That all of this together throughout history has been working on who we are, and we're convinced that we don't know who we are yet. That this is an evolving philosophy. This is an evolving, what do we want to say? Excuse me, an evolving process, there it is, to recognize who we are and what we are and why we are. And I think this is the great challenge that's facing us now. We've been defining this in many ways. We have ghosts and we have aliens. We have all. Well, after 6 decades for myself and almost as many for Sherry, in studying folklore, religion, myth, the visitors, the watchers, whomever they are, we say they have regarded us as a kind of cosmic curiosity, and we have regarded them as gods or goddesses or demons. What we have done in this book, as you have seen, is simply to call these entities the other, because we don't really know exactly who they are. Some of us are convinced they know precisely who they are and what they're doing. But our number one rule, as I know you have heard from us before, Dave, is there is no dogma in paranormal research.
Right.
You have to stay open. None of us have the final answers, no matter how pompous we may sometimes feel. And we all feel a little pompous every now and then. Boy, I was right on that. But then, get ready, because you're going to find out very soon something you're embarrassingly wrong about.
Right. And there are paranormal quote-unquote experts, and I know the kitschy kind of response is, hey, there's no experts. If you've dedicated your life researching it, you're certainly an expert in the research that you've combined and collected. But then you start looking at the different aspects, and it's so funny that we'll sit down with Tim and I will be at an event and we'll talk to a well-known medium or psychic, and they have the answers. They know beyond a shadow of a doubt this is what happens. And then you go to the next event and you speak to somebody who is a well-known psychic or medium, and they have the answers. And although there is some commonality, a lot of times there are big branches that go off into totally different directions.
Big branches.
But they know that this is the way. Do you believe, as we're kind of investigating this over the last 10 and a half years on our radio show, Could it be that they're both right? That is the way, because that is the perception that they have created, and when death comes for them, that is the experience they will have?
Yes. If only these people, and some of them do, many of them do. For example, most, and I have to, you can never say all, there again, that's enough.
Right.
But many of the Native American shaman, for example, they will clearly say, this is my truth. Now, not that it's a superior, and not that it's superiorly different from yours, but they recognize this is my truth. In other words, this is the path that works for me. Now, when the medium intends that, I think we all agree with him or her.
Right.
This is a path, this is a means of perception that this person has found to make sense of the universe. And let's face it, before we do such a bold thing as to spend years and years in research, we do have to come to an understanding of what our truth is, what our bottom line is, but then stay open to learn and learn and learn.
When we're doing this and talking to people around the world, as you and your wife have done for years, and you pull these stories together and you find these, some of them, as we said, have a very interesting common thread. When you give it a slight pull, you'll see things start to align and come together.
Exactly.
And in some cases, they begin to unravel like a sweater when you pull that string. and you find it, but it doesn't mean that it's any less real. We've talked, and as I'm sure you have, there has to be times, Brad, when you and Sherry have spoken to somebody and they tell you a story and you two walk away shaking your head going, what a load of malarkey.
Yeah.
Only to find out that resonates with such a large part of the world that's not insane or dealing with mental issues or breakdowns, but suddenly you realize that you added that story maybe as just, we'll put that in the book, and then suddenly you get this overwhelming response from the world that this meant something. And it wasn't just a kook having a strange experience. It was something that has been and is continuing to have a global effect.
I learned, as so many of us do, the hard way, so many things, Dave. One time I was asked, I had begun corresponding, and of course, in the old days, it was by paper and pen. And I'd been corresponding one time to a medium who had built up a large following, who revered this woman. And she was elderly, and she invited me to speak at her group. Well, I was honored to do that, and we were talking, and beforehand we had a little dinner and so forth, and she's describing some experience, some spiritual experience that she had had that was very meaningful. Mm-hmm. And she went on and on and on, and her followers were kind of weeping and so forth, those who were privileged to join at the table. And then she paused and almost, maybe I was a high school and college teacher too long or whatever. Right. But I hadn't been long out of the classroom at that time. And I said, without even thinking, I said, but couldn't it have been this and this and this? And she got this terrible expression of pain on her face. And she said, I had never thought of that. I had never looked at it that way. And good Lord, I felt for a moment like the worst villain there could be. I had just moments before her big address and before my big address, I say offhandedly, without thinking it through before I said it by reflex.
Right.
But, the way you and I might talk, you would say, Brad, I saw this. It was a haunting, and we saw it. It was incredible, and the people responded. And I might say, yes, but, could it have been a shadow in the creaking door? And you would say, well, it could have been, but this was a woman who had based her entire belief structure for years and years on this one particular, I don't even want to call it statement of faith, but I suppose that's what it was. And without intending to, I had jerked that out from under her, and I felt terrible. And I had to say, well, wait, I was just conjecturing, but I could see the pain in her face. Well, we managed to get through the night. She gave her address, and I was as supportive as I could be. But, one has to say it definitely put a damper on our future relationship.
Well, and with that said, we had a very similar experience with a researcher. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, Ed Ozosky. And about 2 years ago on the show, where he came on and spent the first hour of our show kind of degrading every paranormal TV show and paranormal thing that has come before as being sloppy and messy and this and that. And then he had some of the most holy grail evidence that we would ever hear. And he offered up his first piece of evidence to us as the most impressive piece of electronic voice phenomena that he believes he'd ever caught or anybody had ever caught. And within 12 seconds of listening to it, Tim and I debunked it immediately as an audio watermark on a free what's the term on it, Tim?
On free video, or free audio editing software.
Right, free audio editing software. It was this watermark, so every 30 seconds you would hear this voice say, AVS Media Demo. And he thought it was speaking some kind of Latin backwards. Right. And when we played it for him, it was such a culture shock to a man that held this belief and this thought so dearly that we actually felt bad because you could hear him shatter when we played it. And he would refuse to change that paradigm, that it could be nothing but what he understood it to be.
Right.
And that's where I've found that's the only danger in the paranormal research field, is when you grasp onto a concept so strongly that it can be no other way. And I've had more fun. And I got to guess you and Sherry have, because I've read so many of your books. I see the way that you guys will take a belief and an understanding, and then in 3 books later, you're shifting. You're looking at it a different way. You're seeing the elephant from a different perspective, and it's different. And that's the exciting aspect of this field to me.
Yeah, to me, and to researchers, you and I heard about the incident. Of course, it was kind of a cause celeb in the paranormal field
right.
for a while. But that is responsibility. That is responsibility when you recognize, I really believe there's something here that has grabbed me ever since, and of course as an experiencer ever since I was a child. I have been led, what is really going on? What is really happening? And that's why we, thankfully, the great majority of people have seen it as you see it, where we add to the knowledge. Not that we're changing our minds, not we're saying UFOs don't exist, but maybe we're saying, well, back in 1947 when I was 11, I really was so excited they're from outer space.
Right.
I'm not so sure where they're coming from.
Right. They may not be from outer space. Maybe they're here among us. Maybe they're from one step to the left in a different parallel universe, and that's where it gets exciting with the ideas. We have to take a break. When we come back, Brad, I'd like to know, with all of the work that you've done and all the research, is there still any aspect, any angle of the paranormal that you still scratch your head and say, this just cannot be real? Brad, what, if any, are there any angles of the aspects, or any angles or aspects of the paranormal that you still just can't buy into at this point?
I was thinking about it during the break, and do you mean that I can't accept poltergeists, or I can't accept
fairies, leprechauns, brownies, dragons, whatever kind of? Is there one angle of something alien abductions that you just say, I believe this is going on, but just can't buy into this part of it?
Well, due to my powers of mind, you said the one that I have always doubted, and that's alien abductions. But when we were writing this book, we discovered that some individuals we'd known for quite some time claimed to have been abducted and bore hybrid children. And we devoted a chapter and the better part of 2 chapters to it, because this is something that I've always been skeptical of. But as you know, my books like Mysteries of Time and Space and Worlds Before Our Own, I've always been fascinated, and Sherry too. We've said so often, if we were in our 20s now, we would probably become archaeologists, anthropologists, because we are fascinated by the question of who are we really. So we end by saying, could this concept of hybridization, maybe not from outer space, as some people would say, but from another dimension, could that be our next evolutionary step? And then in the book, and we've been fascinated by this, we deal with the various species, hominins, that have been, I should have said hominins, that have been recently discovered just since I wrote the previous book, like the Denisovans, and there's some in the Philippines, and then of course people know about the little hobbits and so
right.
forth that have been discovered, and we have some of the very latest research from a group of scientists who are doing this because it's their lifeblood. And we've shown that, and there are the giants. We have many of them in Minnesota. Well, there's still giants in Minnesota, but I mean, even taller than the ones that are there.
Right.
7-footers and so forth. Those grades have been found in Minnesota. They've been found in Iowa. They've been found in Ohio. Coal mines and copper mines have been worked, and we know that the Native Americans, none of the Native American tribes worked in those metals or in that particular source of heat, and someone was doing it, so that was the basis of Worlds Before Our Own. And we follow it through now because there have been so many sensible people, and we have people, as I say, who have been our trusted colleagues for years, saying, it's happened to me. And I've been sitting at a restaurant, and 2 kids come running up to me with strange, large eyes, and maybe a little larger than normal heads, just standing and smile. And I have felt, that's what it was when I thought I had that dream, having sexual intercourse on a spaceship. These are now my children, and then they run off into the night. Or some people who have established a contact, some people who have been able to interact with them. And these are sensible, intelligent people.
Right.
Why would they make this up? Because, they're writing, they have their programs, their podcasts, in this particular field, for someone to say, yes, I have born a child, an alien child, it's a hybrid. That's surely not going to bring up your stock in trade. I mean, if you're doing a marvelous job on your program, and you sit in for the coast to coast guys so often. If you said, I got to tell you guys, I'm babysitting my alien child this weekend, I can't make it. Maybe you wouldn't get as many calls, or maybe you would. I don't know.
I'll tell you, with as many kids as I have, I've often worried that bragging on air to the aliens that I'm fertile, I might end up being a test subject. Who knows? I mean, I may have a whole family going on another planet.
Yeah. But this is the thing that has really troubled me the most or bothered me the most. And now, in this particular book, we're confronted with dealing with some of our close friends who write about this in a very sincere and responsible way, like Brett Oldham and Sandy Harrington, and Chris Hawley shares one of her co-workers. I mean, this is something this could be. I mean, let's be open. Something has happened. Something has interacted with us throughout our evolutionary process. And it's fascinating to follow it as it is. But now, I mean, when I wrote Worlds Before Our Own, I think I told you before, that's the first time people have said, and I hope the last, that one of my books should be burned. That came out in the very early 70s, and college campuses and church groups and so forth were just demanding this book be taken away because I was suggesting that there was, and I got this from a rabbi, worlds upon worlds there were before Adam was. And people went bonkers at that time. Well, now, 30 years later, we have discovered so many hominin species.
Right.
And we keep finding them, and we keep pushing farther and farther back. We keep pushing the cave paintings in France and other places farther and farther back. And we have to discover that there was a world before our own, and who occupied it, and have we had a little help? Maybe the angels on high had other missions than simply giving us guidance. Maybe they were sort of shepherding our research, our development.
Well, it would fit in with the biblical stories, and explain how Adam and Eve were the only two and had 3 sons. Where did all of these other people come from? Angelic intervention. You've got over 200 thought-provoking stories that fill up this book. Everything from UFOs, angels, spirits, ghosts, time travel, dreams. You've got a full bore of different types of topics that you cover in this one. We're talking about the alien abductions, and you talk to friends and comrades and people that you've worked with in the field, and you're collecting those stories. And when they share them with you, do you see that they are dealing with any forms of PTSD from those experiences, adding some kind of legitimacy to their claims?
No, they seem normal.
Okay.
If there can be such a thing, if there is such a thing as normal.
Sure.
Well, you asked if there was an area of which we had kind of been cautious, and I gave you as brief an answer as possible. And we're still open to it. But again, we have to follow our own creed of no dogma. So we can't write it off, and we can't tell all of our researcher friends who are just as serious and devoted to their work or their vision of the work or their aspect and facet of the work as we are. So we have to be open to their presentation. And at least for the sake of argument, we demonstrate how this could be, our next evolutionary step as a species.
The idea that there are parallel universes, alternate dimensions that lie side by side. We've only got 2 minutes left in this segment, Brad, but leading in for the next hour when we come back to talk, do you believe that there is enough evidence to prove that theory holds some kind of weight?
Boy, I think it's coming. I really think it's coming. The science magazine's New Scientist, in particular, a weekly publication from the UK, has had a great deal of information on this, and it really detailing some exciting experiments. And I would like to mention that a dear friend who was a pioneer in discussing different dimensions as a possible revelation of what UFOs really are. Trevor James Constable just died, and he was a good friend, and we had a lot of good times together, and just wanted to give a little memoriam to him. He's mentioned in the book as some of his research about different entities that inhabit the clouds, and he had sent pictures through the years, that of something that we are coming to believe that the UFO themselves are alive, and that they are. Well, we have a nuclear scientist presenting one of the papers as a guest in our book of, symbiotic plasma theory, that these individuals can shape the plasma from their dimension or enter ours and shape plasma here to represent themselves as the various entities they are. And I know after the break we can talk a little bit about, the UFO as an intelligence. UFO intelligence, though we prefer saying, the other and other dimensional, in a sense then there seems to be a particular intelligence that we will group as UFO, not saying they're aliens from other worlds, but saying that this is the guise, or this is the persona that they have chosen in the last century or two to reveal themselves.
Brad Steiger, our guest. Real Visitors, Voices from Beyond, and Parallel Dimensions will continue when we're back with more Darkness Radio.
There you go, folks. We're at the halfway point with Darkness Radio, Beyond the Darkness, and Brad Steiger. We talked a little bit at the beginning of the show about Brad and his writing. I had mentioned before that Brad had written a book with Art Bell, and that book is out there still. You can find it. It's called The Source, Journey Through the Unexplained. And if you can get a hold of it, maybe at Half Price Books or an old bookstore, get a hold of it. Take a look at it. Brad will say something here in the second half of the program that is fitting. And it's something that you should hold on to. He mentions with all the podcasts out there and paranormal TV shows that we've really lost contact with books. And I want you to remember that, because Brad, at that time that we were talking with him, had authored himself 65 books. But Brad has penned in his career, I want you to listen to this fact. He has penned over 2,000 articles on paranormal subject and authored or co-authored over 175 books, both fiction and nonfiction, and has sold 17 million copies. Think about that for a minute, to be that prolific in the paranormal. It's amazing. Think of the knowledge that came forth from this brilliant mind of Brad Steiger. The titles that are out there that you should look for: Mysteries of Time and Space, Real Ghosts, Restless Spirits, and Haunted Places, Conspiracies and Secret Societies, The Complete Dossier, Project Blue Book, The Rainbow Conspiracy. Also, don't forget The Source, Journey Through the Unexplained. That's the book with Art Bell that he co-authored. And Four-Legged Miracles, Heartwarming Tales of Lost Dogs' Journeys Home, which he wrote with his second wife and spiritual companion, Sherry Hansen Steiger, who is the love of his life and who he is survived by. Brad is surely going to be missed by Sherry. They had 2 sons, 3 daughters, 10 grandchildren, and his passing is going to leave a hole in their bookshelves and on their schedules of paranormal podcasters everywhere worldwide, as well as radio broadcasters as well. So again, let's jump back into the second half of this program. And remember, as you're listening to Brad talk, this was only a couple years ago. remember his words about books. And think about that as we're talking to Brad in the second half of this program. Think about the books that are out there. And as you're listening to this, take a look at the Amazon page that's listed in the description of this podcast and go look for Brad's books. And go order one, because this man was a wealth of knowledge. And honor Brad's memory by picking up one of those books today, won't you? One last time, here's our friend Brad Steiger and his memory right here on Beyond the Darkness.
Welcome back to the show. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Along with me, my co-host and producer, Tim Dennis. Brad Steiger, our guest this evening, as we talk about his new book, Real Visitors, Voices from Beyond and Parallel Dimensions, a book that exposes the power and lasting effects of otherworldly beings through the centuries of legends, myths, and in today's world. Brad Steiger, as I mentioned in the first hour, is an author and co-author of 181 books with over 17 million copies in print. He is one of the guiding lights in the field of the paranormal, and certainly somebody we respect completely with our show, and having him back again, it's always a pleasure. Brad, talking about the UFO phenomena and the fact that maybe some of these craft are intelligent themselves and that we've been looking at it wrong. People talk about the breakneck speeds that some of these craft can go and then stop on a dime and then back up and take off again in a totally different direction. And people say that is impossible. That is something that cannot be done. Yet we know that there are insects and hummingbirds and other creatures that can do that type of maneuvering. So it would almost make sense that perhaps these craft are somewhat living in nature.
Indeed. And who they are and their purpose, I think we will agree they're definitely more than insects. But you are right to compare that this is not unknown, this type of phenomena. Now, again, it took me quite a while to 1947 comes, I'm 11 years old, yay, they're here. I began collecting information about UFOs, but my love is the paranormal because, as you know from previous conversations, I grew up in a house that was haunted. It had been the site of the old stagecoach stop in our area, and according to old-timers, the James and Younger boys stopped there on their way for the great Northfield, Minnesota raid. So that I felt that not then, but I look back now, since my sister and I are both insomniacs, that, being awakened so many nights by the activity, caused us to be kind of very light sleepers. And I now reflect that, they may have been passengers waiting for the stage. And very often I would run downstairs and I'd be looking out the window because I would hear the sound of a wagon and horses, a team of horses, and my mom would be there, and I said, they're running again, and she says, yep, they're running again. So this was a kind of phenomenon with which we grew up. So the paranormal was my area of interest, not UFOs, even though I was fascinated by them. In 1966, well, 65 actually, I acquired by some little bit of chance some of the treasures of the Rudolph Valentino estate and possessions, and someone who had been president of his various fan clubs. And my agent said, oh, my goodness, it's time to do a big biography of Valentino. So I was contracted to do that. At the same time, I was contracted for my first big book on the paranormal, Strange Guests, which had Ivan T. Sanderson, I think you're familiar with that name. He had been my mentor.
Yes.
And I was excited. He had arranged and made connections. He thought I was the man to do the book on Poltergeist that he had tried to get done someone for years. So I was writing that. I was in the process, but then comes Valentino. So I'm flown out, put up in a hotel by the publisher to finish it so it could come out as quickly as possible. And while I'm there, I meet editors from a wide variety of houses, and there's publishing houses, and I am invited then to some great New York literary party, my first one from this good old Iowa boy, and people who had read some of the advanced galleys and so forth said, he says, you're going to be the next Harold Robbins, you're going to be the next biographer of the stars, you're going to be, then my agent interrupted and said, no, he wants to write kook books. And everyone looked at him, you mean cookbooks? And my agent laughed and said, no, kooky books. He wants to write about ghosts and things that go bump in the night. And instead of being ridiculed, I was literally descended upon by these editors, and they all had a paranormal story to tell, and they wanted my, what does it mean? What did it mean this happened? What did it mean? Some are really very good stories. And by the time I went back home, I had 5 contracts to do paranormal books, and an editor said, what about UFOs? And I said, well, I've never written about UFOs, but I would be happy to. And that became the book Strangers from the Skies, which, came out at a very propitious time. That was right when dear Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a very wise and brilliant man, who was misquoted saying that, UFOs are probably all swamp gas, which Sherry worked for Dr. Hynek or with Dr. Hynek until his death. And she says, he never said it that way. But it was all the talk. It was all the radio shows and TV shows. And so my book on UFOs became a bestseller in 2 weeks. And I became an authority on UFOs on the basis of that one book. So I'm invited to various different organizations, colleges, New Age gatherings to talk about UFOs. And while I'm talking, I'm interviewing, would be a better word, contactees, people who claim to have been taken on board or claim to have been given information by ufonauts, I began to notice the same kind of thing. It was like they were in some kind of cosmic Sunday school, and they were given the same little lessons over and over about be good to each other, be kind, conserve nature, be good to the planet, all of these things. And I say they're coming from outer space to tell us this. I mean, this is what they're not going to share any of their secrets. All they're going to do is give us little platitudes. So I said to some fellow researchers with whom I had become friends in the UFO field, I said, I'm back in the paranormal. The paranormal is my field. I feel like I'm back in talking to mediums. I feel like I'm back in the seance hall or the seance room, because this is the same. Instead of a shooting star as the guide, now it was Munka from Mars or wherever. And I just saw that this was, I had to kind of review my excitement about they're here. Well, they've probably always been here, but whether they come from outer space or other worlds, the doubt was planted then quite early in my mind.
Can you tell us, what is your definition of terms like extraterrestrials, ultra-terrestrials? How does that break down, or is it all kind of just, depending on who's talking about the beings that they're discussing and how they're used?
I think that's probably it, Dave.
Okay.
Depending on who's talking about them. Hynek had a good term, meta-terrestrial, meaning, beyond space. But I think more and more people are recognizing, whether you're talking extra-dimensional, interdimensional, ultra-terrestrial, supraphysical, or metaterrestrial, more and more people are moving away from extraterrestrial, which simply means coming from another planet or an extraterrestrial world. So I think that more people are saying, come on, we know we are in an impatient species, but you've really had time enough to declare yourself. I got a question the other night, are they going to take over the Senate and announce their presence? Well, if they're going to do that, they would have done it long ago, I think. But they have announced their presence, whoever they are, I think from the very beginning, since we stood upright as a species, maybe before we stood upright as a species. We go back to the ancient cave paintings again. And this idea of the paintings so often reflecting what seems to be a combination of a bird and a human, or some other animal and a human, I think could also reflect that our ancestors knew they were with an intelligence that wasn't the same as they were. We're recognizing now that they weren't just our species at this time, thousands of years ago. Maybe they won't go back as far as Sherry and I would like to go, and others would like to go, but it goes back farther and farther, where it indicates that people are recognizing what today we might call angels, or we might call extraterrestrials, or we might call ultra-terrestrials, that this kind of activity in exchange has been announcing itself to those who are able to hear and able to see, as the old platitude goes, that they are here and they do exist and they do interact with us and have always done so.
That's what I have started to see and believe about this as well, that, the people have had encounters with aliens, quote unquote aliens, but they can be rebuked by the name of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
To me, that's a strange deal. The religious edict would be, well, because Christ is that powerful. But what about people that don't believe in that theology and they're evoking the name and it's still having an effect? And if these beings are, outside of the realm of our understanding and concepts of life beyond our planet, because it doesn't really clearly define in the Bible that that there are aliens, although it seems that they allude to that numerous times throughout the book. Mm-hmm. It never really confirms or denies that. It's certainly an interesting aspect that, if they are beyond what we understand, they should have no effect by things like a religious evocation.
No.
And that's been part of what's bothered me. And Tim and I have said, we'll have a lot of listeners that'll pour in. They're like, why don't you do more shows about aliens and alien communication? And what we've come to believe is so many of these stories, as you brought up, turn into these kind of tree-hugging, hippy-dippy, as soon as we're prepared, they'll mm-hmm. And I've spoken about it on the show. We'll never be prepared. We are not that kind of people. We are destructive, and it'd be nice to think that we're eventually going to move up and in the evolutionary process become more enlightened. I'm actually, and I don't know where your thoughts are on this, but looking at the way our culture is going, I see us destructing much faster than evolving into a higher consciousness. We are becoming more bullies. We're becoming more introverted. We're becoming more aggressive and angry. I mean, and understand, I'm not trying to get into the political rhetoric here, but when we're actually considering a man-child like Donald Trump as a possible president who cannot hold any, what's the word I'm looking for here, respect for anybody or the position to which he is trying to take power for, it's not that I'm against his policies or his ideas, but he calls people names. Mm-hmm. He refers to women as fat cows and heifers. He refers to people that he doesn't like. And is this a man that we want in this? And I'm blown away that the evolutionary process of what we are expecting and accepting is becoming lower and lower. And I'm waiting for him to come out and saying he's punking us and that this is, he just wanted to show how much of a change we've really wanted in politics, that he could act like a complete buffoon and we would still vote for him because it's a difference. But I worry.
A good lesson for everyone, wouldn't it? A good lesson.
Yeah, but I worry about the fact that, if these aliens are so intelligent and really so worried about us, this is the best time in history. We are the most open and I think willing to believe beyond ourselves. And I think after 9/11, even more so. I think we're starting to de-evolve since 9/11 when people were seeking answers and the church was not able to necessarily provide those answers.
Right.
I think that would have been a great awakening moment because people were coming together seeking outside help. The aliens would have had a perfect effect then. So I have a real hard time with the whole hippy-dippy, once we're all loving one another and coming, it's never worked that way. It'll never work that way. Plus, even the religious side, Brad, is against that, right? Because even the religious talks about not one God, not one belief, because that's bad too. So how do we ever get to a place of enlightenment when even our religion says, no, we can't all fall under one umbrella?
Well, that's, again, the chapter which we discuss, the concept of alien and the contemporary religious experience, which I hope people will read in the seriousness with which we present it. We're not saying, the editor changed a chapter title. I have one in the book, which you see, Aliens Love Us. The original title was Aliens Love Us, This We Know, for the Contactees Tell Us So.
Right.
And, probably rightly he took that off with just Aliens Love Us. But then the one about contemporary religious experience, it's not that we're saying they're coming with the truth, but they are, in terms of what is happening in our species evolution at this time, they are seeming to provide answers. And we try to compare, truly the masters of trying to define our religious experience, the real experts who define what an epiphany is, and how this has been distorted by some believers who believe that these are sent by God to pull us into a greater time. And we probably have listeners right now saying, "You two deluded fools, don't you know that's why they're here, to save our souls?" And I think if you really examine, there ain't been much of that soul saving going on. There's really been a distortion of probably the true humility and love of one's brother and sister that, okay, it is there, but usually it's there with the price of believing a certain way of going.
Right.
That could be in conflict with truly the evolution that we at one time seemed to be moving toward. Now, there's a study that was just conducted here, again, I'm quoting New Scientist, saying that our evolution has ended. It's over. Our species evolution, it has not gained one IQ point in the last 10 years. So they're saying, now what's coming? Roboto,
Right.
And how easily this that has been just, whether it's I Be Back, Arnold, or whatever as robots, we see, that we don't have a chance if someone gets robots that they would snuff us out. So that can't but be what we desire as a species. So we're in the time of great turmoil now, and we just sincerely hope that people will read our new book with the idea of not getting the truth, but getting some aspects of thought and purpose and a way of going that perhaps can help them sort all the vast melee of information and material. And, let's face it, there's a tear in my voice when I say, people don't read books very much anymore.
No, they don't.
No, and thankfully there are podcasts and there are programs such as yours, but, I don't mean to be judgmental, but the vast majority that I hear, I don't turn back on again because I just see, in my opinion, okay, I'm being a little judgmental, but Sherry and I just regard some of these as, hey, we watched something the other night that was to prove that the scientists that people hyperventilate until they're fainted. Well, we knew that used to be a little kids game from kids that we thought were a little sick to play the game.
Right.
But then he does the reading of the brain and so forth, and he proves that the things that they experience were the same as a near-death experience. And Sherry and I said, the heck you did. You just proved people have visions when they faint. That's not a near-death experience.
Not at all.
Not at all. But that's and it's just you could almost hear da 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 da. I have Science Academia wins again and puts you simple, primitive, superstitious creatures back into your caves. Well, it just isn't so. There is a greater opening among some of our conventional scientists, thank the powers that be. But by that same token, there are just as many that are closed-minded and ain't necessarily so as they're everywhere. I just have to say that I checked during break, and there's a message from Frank Joseph.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but he wrote one before, too, and I wrote one. And, of course, he didn't mention that he's going to be on tonight. I'm going to have to write him quickly and say, break a leg, So. He has his new dolphin book, right?
Right, that's the one we're going to be speaking about, yeah.
And Sherry and I did a blurb for that.
Oh, great. Great tie-in with this, then.
Yeah, I was chuckling to myself when I looked, and because he didn't mention he's discussing some other little bit of business that we're doing back and forth. We've known each other a good long time, and he's a good friend, and he is the man to fill in so many of the gaps that we're talking about. I know you're going to have a great conversation with him.
Great. Let me talk to you about time travel, Brad.
Yeah.
This is one of my fascinations. I know you cover it in the book.
Yeah.
And there's so much thought in, is time travel real? And there's constantly things popping up. As a matter of fact, Tim's going to post a story. There's an interesting video that's popped up. I don't know if you saw this, Brad, from 1995 during a Mike Tyson bout. During one of the close-ups, there appears to be a man in the audience holding up a cell phone taking a photograph. And there was no cameras that looked like that, nor were there smartphones like that at that time. There are these weird, out-of-place, out-of-date photographs and videos and these things that show up that appear to come from nowhere that they should. We find relics that are buried deep into the earth that show cogs and wheels and machinery that should not have existed at those times. What do you make of the belief and theories of time travel? Has it happened or will it?
I'm like you. I love time travel stories. They're among my favorite motion pictures. But we've done it experimentally with the mind. And I think of one time we did it live on television from Chicago. And a friend of mine turned out to be a really good subject. So I was living in Chicago at the time, and I said, well, you come into Chicago, you and your husband and so forth, and we will do this demonstration. And she was very shy and a very quiet kind of person, but she says, sure, I'll do it for you. And so they came in, and we did not know what tests they're going to do. And remember, this is live on television.
Right.
And in the front row were a group of Lincoln scholars, and they challenged us to send her back in time to the day he gave the Gettysburg Address. Now this, no way to prepare, no way to kind of cram if we were that kind of people.
Right.
And so we did it cold. And the scholars were astonished. They said she recalled everything to the best of their ability as scholars. How Lincoln moved, which arm he lifted first, when he took his glasses out, when he unrolled the paper. She had it down. And we asked her, how? She says, well, I saw a little girl in the front audience of the audience, and I went and saw it through her eyes. Now, okay, we're just now thinking, wow. And the scholars are saying, well, we can't explain this, and we know you didn't have any chance for preparation. We just sprung it on you. And then the host, who was taking the place of the regular host in Chicago, he was from Boston. And he said, okay, I've got another challenge. Okay, here something comes right up. Go to my house and describe it to me. Well, we had suggestion again. We said go to, and we find house and gave the name, and he gave the address, and he went, and then our subject began to describe the furniture, the labels on furniture, and then she says, oh, you're getting company. And she described the two people, and he says, well, those are dear friends of ours from New Hampshire, but we weren't expecting them. They must have stopped in unannounced. And then during commercial, he went home and called his wife, and that couple did drop by unexpectedly, just as that subject saw it. Now, there is definitely the mind free of time and space, and we've conducted many such experiments as that, but when it comes to the physical body, I don't know. My grandmother had the original, not the original, but the copy that the U.S. Army put out of the Matthew Brady Civil War photographs. And I would look through that book, and every once in a while I'd see standing among the generals and so forth, hey, you don't look like you belong then. You look like a dude from right now in 1940 whenever I'm looking at it. And I've been fascinated by that. Whenever there's a group history picture, I've begun to look and see who doesn't belong in that picture.
Right.
And I'm getting a chill now as I'm saying it. It's just that do some people, and if again, if the entities, these metaterrestrials or superterrestrials or whoever they are, maybe they do have the ability, because if time is cyclical, if time progresses and it's going on at the same time, we have the chapter in time because we have this brilliant scientist who's been with the Army for so many years, was intrigued by when he read about my near-death experience. He thought, well, he wanted to prove it mathematically. So he comes up, and we have this in the book, and we feel honored that he presents his thesis in our book before he publishes it in his field of research, frozen time. Frozen time. So if there are individuals who can freeze time, if we can go back. But I think of the Ray Bradbury story, where they go back hunting dinosaurs.
Oh, right.
Do you remember that story?
Yes.
And someone steps on what looks like a butterfly.
Right.
Because they don't go off the trail, don't go off the trail. And someone just accidentally steps, and he steps on a butterfly. And when they come back to the present time, the letter E is not in the alphabet. And I love that story because I think you cannot go back, you cannot mess with time without somehow screwing it up. Now, unless, again, here we are, if there are some entities so advanced that they can play in time and space, then they would really, that would be awesome. I mean, I know so many of us would be envious because, I would love to go back to certain moments in time and space, and I'm sure we all would.
I'm not, how do I say this? I'm not convinced we aren't already time traveling, and that some of the things we hear and experience aren't time travelers. The things that we think are ghosts, the voices that we hear, could be that they've ghosted. That's the way they can't affect the physical realm, and maybe that's why we're experiencing some of these strange moments. We've got just a few minutes remaining, about eight and a half minutes left. Brad, hit me with a couple of your very favorite stories from the new book, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, that's always a tough one. I wanted to bring up something you mentioned as you were running through the various aspects, and that's something I've seen get more, quote, respect, unquote, and that's the we people, the fairies, the elves, the fae.
Sure.
And I wish we had more time to discuss that. And maybe another time we can do it. But Sherry had experiences with the fae growing up. I had dramatic ones, and I caught an elf, a Nissa, as we'd call them in our tradition. I caught a Nissa spying on my parents when I was not quite 5. And he turned and gave me a look that said, "All right, buddy, game is on." and he's never left. I mean, he manifests from time to time, always to do some kind of ornery thing until I call him on it. And I have a couple of those examples in the book. One is, when I was a kid, alone home, suddenly running through the house, throwing furniture around and whatever. And if that doesn't get you, if you're just, you're alone and there's no one there and there's no one, when you actually, experience that. And I'll bet a lot of people, and again, Sherry is Swedish Chippewa, and I'm in two cultures in Minnesota, and I'm Norwegian Danish, and I hear from a lot of people, and I know this has nothing to do with ethnic group, but yet by the same token, it may have. Maybe certain ethnic groups are more susceptible, if that's the right word, or are more open to experiences with certain types of entities that become, and here's the key word, tutorial. It begins teaching you to accept the paranormal, to accept the other worlds of which we are a part, and we may be living simultaneously at the same time.
Why not? I mean, there's so much to these different encounters that are taking place. And I used to laugh when I would speak with Rosemary Ellen Guiley when she would be so passionate about the fairy folk. And I just thought, wow. And then I stood back and I said, really, this is where you draw the line. You believe that Native Americans may have been able to shift their form from human to wolf or bird, but the idea that we people exist, in stories that predate most of the rest of our culture, and in cultures that here in 2016 still will build major thoroughfares, spend billions and millions of dollars to move roads to not disturb fairy mounds or fairy trees or gnome habitats. You start to think there's got to be more to this than just a silly superstition, because money always seems to supersede it.
Very often to their great expense, isn't it?
Right, yeah. It shuts down their work, shuts down their business, messes with them in insane ways. So it's been interesting as this journey progresses. And I caught a photograph. I'll have to see if I can find it, Brad, and I'll send it to you and Sherry.
Right.
Because I was at the Sorrel Weed House in Savannah, Georgia, and I was standing in the backyard between the house and the slave quarters, and everybody else was in investigating. It was hot and steamy that night, as it is in Savannah, Georgia, and I just started taking a series of photographs, and there was a black mat garbage can out there, and in the first couple of pictures, there's nothing, and all of a sudden, I capture this light anomaly, And, a lot of times when we expand those and we enlarge them, they'll pixelate and break up and become an unrecognizable mess. Mm-hmm. But what was fascinating to me about this is as I enlarged it, I see it looks like the FTD man, that little Apollo. There is this little being running, and it's not a reflection because it's a plastic black matte garbage can. The flash did not reflect off of that garbage can in any other photos before or after that one, but I captured what looks like a little being.
Yeah.
And I just sat back and I said, what is this? And
I believe you, Dave. I believe you.
I'm sure you do, Brad. I know you're rolling your eyes. You and Sherry are shaking your heads right now.
No, we're not. No, we're not. We know whereof you speak.
That's right. And that was a bit of an eye-opener. I'm not going to lie to you. That's why I said so much of this field is exciting still, isn't it? Because even though you start to think you have an understanding of what's going on, it's quickly taken back from you. Your arrogance will undo you when you start believing too much that you already know what's going on in the world around you.
Yeah, some previously unannounced partner puts another card into the game and throws it all off just when you thought you were winning.
Yeah, exactly. Brad, we're at the end of our time together, and I want to thank you, and hopefully we can visit again when Sherry can join us on the air. What projects do you have in the mix next? What can we look forward to hearing from?
Well, they're still kind of in the nascent quality, so I probably would prefer not speaking because they're still forming, but believe me, you would be among the first to know.
Well, as always, we appreciate your time, Brad. Give our best to Sherry, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you in the future. Real Visitors, Voices from Beyond and Parallel Dimensions. Brad and Sherry Steiger, the authors of that new book. We have links to that at darknessradio.com under the Guests tab. Check it out for yourself. Special thanks to Brad and Sherry Steiger for our guests in the first 2 hours.
There you go, folks. That is in memory of Brad Steiger. We felt we couldn't let this heavy occasion go by without honoring our friend Brad Steiger one last time here on Beyond the Darkness. We want to thank our friends at FromYouFlowers.com for sponsoring today's show. And we want to send out our condolences to Sherry Steiger, his wife, their 2 sons, 3 daughters, 10 grandchildren on the passing of Brad. Brad was a wonderful light in our world. I can't tell you guys how open he was when we wanted a guest that would come on that would engage you guys, that would bring such wonderful content to the show, that would stimulate your imaginations, that would bring interest, not only interesting, but entertaining things to you. We knew that we could call up Brad Steiger and we could say, Brad, what do you have on this? Or have you had experiences with this? Or do you know of things that involve this topic? And Brad could pull so much knowledge on any topic that we could present to him. And he was open and honest about everything and just had a wealth of knowledge as far as everything. Well, Brad, we want to thank you. And this was our way of thanking you. And by airing it one last time, airing a show and letting people hear your voice. And that voice is out there forever, folks. There are archives of different shows that Brad's done. The books are there. The knowledge is out there for you to read. Please don't put down the books. Don't forget about those books. Go out there and collect the works of Brad Steiger. Go out there and enjoy the works of Brad Steiger and support the work of Brad Steiger. Because this was a great man, an American institution in the paranormal that we should remember for all time. His work was very important. His work was amazing. And he was an amazing storyteller, right up there with the best storytellers that you can think of. Brad, we'll miss you. We love you. And we look forward to seeing you again, my friend. For Dave Schrader, I'm Tim Dennis. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.